Let's do Q&A right here, and while everything's fresh in our minds. Anybody got a question?
It's,
Here you go.
I'm sorry. It's not a question. I really enjoyed what you are doing. Is it working?
Yeah.
With your project, but have you think about the next step to try to make it a virtual reality where people are more involved? Now you can do that with app. I come from big data and AI, and this is something that is definitely doable.
Yeah, both in the historical condition and in the future condition, we've been exploring ways to make the views animated, and also in a virtual reality thing.
Because now you have tools where you have these kind of glasses, 3D glasses, where people can somehow function and turn, and what they see would be, for example, the habitat that was there 400 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Could be pretty cool.
Yeah. We've also thought of things like, an app that you could walk around in the city and you take a picture, and the picture that comes back is what you would have seen 400 years ago from that perspective. Or you walk around in the city and it knows where you are, and it's mixing the sounds that would have been 400 years ago.
Cool. Yeah.
So you could have like a radio station that's 1609 Manahatta, something like that. Yeah, there's lots of ideas, and technology can be used in pernicious ways, obviously, but it can be used in really positive ways. And we're in a great age of creativity and fecundity about using these computer tools in particular to reimagine the world.
Well, in that vein, are you thinking about gaming platforms?
So a lot of people see the Vision Maker and they think a lot about SimCity, or if you're a little bit younger, you think about Minecraft. So I can get any young boy to pay attention to me just by saying the word Minecraft, right? If you have a young kid or if you have a grandkid, you'll know what I mean. So what I say to them is ours is sort of like a school version of Minecraft, where it's not a made-up neighborhood, it's a real neighborhood, it's your neighborhood. You can actually zoom to your school or your house and see how it's doing. And it's real scientific models, not like made-up models, right? Like real scientific models that are validated. We have some functionality that some teachers asked us for, which are about challenges. So say, the teacher can challenge the students to, pick the 4 blocks around the school, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions 80%, and, reduce the stormwater by 20%, and increase the population by 10%. And then each student has to make a vision, and there's lots of different combinations of things you can do to create that vision. So, yeah.
Sharon, what you're doing is recreating what Eric has done visually. So if you scratch the earth, it comes back the way that it does. I have a couple of references for you, Eric, though. When I was a teenager, I lived in New York, and one of the books that I read was A Natural History of New York. And I remember vividly a page in that book talking about the last bald eagle seen in New York was on an ice floe in the Hudson River in 1948.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
John Kieran's book, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it was amazing to me. My grandparents grew up in the city, and my grandmother would talk about, the wilderness in 1910 beyond 158th Street, the farms and all of that.
Right.
And one last reference. I've seen your website this week, which is just magnificent.
Thank you.
From an entirely different direction. I didn't know you were going to be here. There's a very interesting graphic novel by Will Eisner, Iesner, who lived in the Bronx, grew up in the Bronx, called The Neighborhood, Dropsy Avenue. And it's a history of his neighborhood from the Native Americans through through the 1970s and all of that. It's extremely interesting book because it talks about how do people develop property. And it's about real estate, it's about politics, it's about people. It's a magnificent piece. And you might want to look at that as for inclusion in what you're doing.
No, thanks for mentioning that. I don't know about that, especially that third one. From the generation before your folks, there are these amazing accounts at the end of the 19th century, like reminiscences of an octogenarian, from 1890. And, Manhattan went from about 40,000 people in 1800 at the beginning of the 19th century to almost 2 million people by 1900. Can you imagine if, you're on an island that's 18 miles long and it goes from 40,000 people to 2 million people over the course of your lifetime? I mean, that's such an enormous change. And so, you know, it was actually very useful for us because those kind of books would describe, oh, there used to be a stream along Fifth Avenue where I used to go snipe hunting. But now we would know where the stream on Fifth Avenue was, right? And we could put the point on the map together. So, yeah.
Just a quick question for Eric. As part of your Vision Maker software, is there continual updating with current science?
Well, it just launched citywide last June, so it's as current as we can make it now.
I mean, is there built-in capacity for that?
Well, there's built-in capacity to change the models and change the parameters on the
Oh, that's
back end.
fantastic.
Yeah, if you know, obviously it's doing a lot of complicated things in terms of parameterizing all the 70 ecosystems and the 5 lifestyles and the 6 climate scenarios. So there's little eyes all over the site, and you follow the eyes, it'll actually take you to a table of the parameters that are used for each of the models. And in multiple cases, many of the cases we have multiple values because there isn't always agreement in the scientific literature. What is the carbon sequestration rate of a oak hickory forest, right? So it actually show you whatever we can find in the literature and then show you which one we picked. And one of the things we invite is for scientists to review the work and give us suggestions. Yeah.
I want to, Sharon, the summary that you gave as to how we can bring ecological health back to our society, and we brought it through the Manhattan presentation today. What do you think about the hot topic now of who is going to be in charge of decision-making in this country in regards to control over real estate and politics and giant development that is really subsuming and taking over our ecological areas, our wetlands, our grasses, our general open space? The hot topic I'm referring to is the federal government's new advanced second phase their new requirements, the MS4 of the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. I think unless we can, what do you think? But I think if we can't deal with any kind of regulatory sensibility, how can we bring our ecosystems back? And maybe you can say something about that.
You always ask easy questions, Ellen.
So you're asking how can the regulatory system work in this area to try to foster restoration and?
The present system, the EPA is trying to implement a second phase of their national pollution discharge, whereby all of the stormwater will have to be tightly regulated. Our streets, our parking lots, our rivers have to be cleaned up, all of our outfalls have to be identified. We're not doing that. So how will the federal government help us?
Well, the EPA is working on that. I think you're going to see some progress in that area, certainly with pollution control. But how can we see more whole ecosystem restoration going on? I mean, we have to deal with the water pollution issues and improve quality, but there's so many other facets in really having an ecosystem view of restoration. And I actually see something happening at the federal level that under President Obama, he instructed his agencies to incorporate ecosystem services considerations in their decision making, which kind of gets back to what I was talking about, having a biodiversity or ecosystem based approach to decisions. So I think that's going to help tremendously. And we need to see that also happening at the state and local level. So we've got, certainly our legislature is progressive in these areas, and I think we can see a lot more happen there. But there's also locally, we can't forget how important each individual community is, because we're all connected. If more communities are doing the better pollution control, wetlands protection, ecological restoration, that's all going to connect and improve our environment in so many ways, the carbon restoration, the nutrient cycling, water cycling, all of that. So I think that we've got a strong potential for more of that to happen and for great strides to be made, but a lot of it's going to depend on who our next president is, the national level certainly, and and how active we can be as people to make these things happen.
You know, when I saw your last couple slides, I completely agree with you, but I think rather than maybe a regulatory approach, this is really the time for an economic approach. Because the one thing that does touch all aspects of all those decisions you talked about are the economics, right? And right now we live in an economic system that doesn't value nature at all, right? And that's why we have all these externalities. And carbon taxes, as Professor Carroll was talking about, is a very important part of that. But there's ways of thinking even more synthetically. And in Terra Nova, I write about these gate duties, which are, you know, when natural resources enter the economy, including the land that enters the economy, and the waste that come out, that's the appropriate and moral place to place taxation. And if we do, and release taxes elsewhere in the economy that are less productive economically and also socially and politically problematic, like the sales tax and some parts of the income tax and so forth. But anyway, if you could actually put the taxes when the economy touches nature, that's how you would get the most power. And it would be integrated in all the decision makings. So, and I think maybe, you know, carbon taxes are just the thin edge of the wedge for that.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question.
You already had your chance, Laurie.
This is a question for Eric. I think what you've done is very powerful. I'm just wondering, are there similar studies being done for other metropolitan areas that you know of that are in the works that are along these lines? Because
You mean in terms of the historical ecology?
In terms of historical ecology, and
Yeah.
particularly, I think, just wondering if there's anything going on in eastern Massachusetts.
I don't know anything about eastern Massachusetts, sorry. I know there's a good group in San Francisco that's doing similar kinds of work for the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's some things out west. I once was on a panel with a guy from Seattle, but I would love to see a very similar study for Boston, and based on what I know about New York and what I know about the historical map resources, it would be completely possible to do it here. And you saw the woman who talked about the Charles River earlier today. You know, there was some hint of that, but you could really drive it much further, I think.
Could add to that. I think if we could do some of that kind of work in more suburban and rural communities, so that we can make sure we're protecting what we need to protect that's remaining, but also do more restoration. And if we had the kind of information that you've developed for Manhattan, that would be tremendous. I know in Massachusetts we have maps of, in the 1800s, the old woodlots, which have been viewed as the sort of the wellspring for biodiversity that's still remaining, the form of biodiversity, and trying to build on those areas, connecting restoration to those lands. And certainly the state of Massachusetts has done biomap to map all the important rare and endangered species, but also the common species that are linked with the rare and endangered, so that we're trying to map out and have mapped what the important natural areas are as far as a whole ecosystem. So that kind of work I think is great, not only in the city, but in the suburban and rural areas.
Well, thank you all very much for coming today. We really appreciate